Thank you. I'll start by saying a few words about the approach that we adopted for this study. We are looking at the mobility of labor and jobs as substitutes or complementing future policy makings, and I'll come back to this point later. We took a very long-term view of the analysis since the beginning. We started the work a few years ago. And at that time, what we wanted was to be able to abstract it from the controversy that was surrounding global people and job mobility. That means migration and outsourcing, and which the global slowdown is only worsening. The main target audience for this work is actually policymakers in both sending and receiving countries. Two pillars have underpinned this analysis. First, there will be increasingly strong forces pulling for people and jobs mobility across the world because of demographics first, and also because of reduction in transportation and communication costs. And the second one is that countries can do nothing or choose to be proactive to seize opportunities and address risks heads-on. Now, what it's important to note since on the onset is that future developments relating to productivity, capital versus labor mobility, labor intensity, science and technology could transform the picture in a very different way and open different avenues for future labor and job mobility. In this graph, you can see the demographic change by age group and region worldwide between 2010 and 2050, assuming that there is zero migration. And what we see, well, we know that the world population is going to grow by some 2.6 billion to reach 9 billion by 2050. That's a fact. The most striking thing here is that all age groups increase everywhere. In all regions, except for sub-Saharan Africa, the youngest groups will either decline or witness very small increases. And the share of old age persons, 65 and plus, will more than double. As you can see, the first bar you have is the light blue is the 0 to 14 year old, and that's going down almost everywhere except, as I said, in the Middle East, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And the old age, we see the last one, is going up basically everywhere in the world. The implication for the labor force worldwide is that we are going to see two kinds of phenomena in the world. One is that in some regions of the world, the total labor force will decline, and let's call those deficit regions. In others, the labor force age 15 to 39 is going to grow. Why 15 to 39? Because that's the age at which people are likely to move. Before or after mobility is really much less possible. So the increase in the labor force, age 15 to 39, in the growing regions will be around 570 million people. The deficit in the regions where the labor force is going to shrink, so worldwide, the deficit is going to be about 215 million. Now, the little graph down is, which looks very weird, is actually shows what would happen if the emigration of the 15 to 39 labor force remains at current emigration rates. I mean, with the current economic and social and political parameters. And what we see is that basically no more than 32 million people would be willing or able to move to go and meet the deficit in the labor shrinking regions of the total deficit of 215 million. Here, what we see is a quick look at the aging of the labor force in Europe, and in Slovenia, for example, the 15 to 39 age labor force will decline by close to 50% by 2050. As you can see, the Eastern European countries, you see Slovakia, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Poland, Hungary, are the most affected, but some of the Western European countries are also facing a big challenge in this respect. You can see Spain, Italy, even Portugal, Germany, and then even the ones that are like France, who don't face such a challenging situations as others, are still going to see close to 15, if not more, % of the labor force aged 15 to 39 and 40 to 64 decline. And 15% is not a trivial number. So it's quite challenging for Europe. Now, what are the possible consequences of what we've seen so far? What this introduction establishes is that there were going to be large-scale global labor market imbalances that may occur in the future, and that will create strong impetus for migration flows. There are two possible scenarios. One is that we have low mobility. And we remain at the parameters of today, and as we have seen, only 32 million against a deficit of about 215 million. So what would be the consequences in labor deficit regions? Labor deficit regions could experience stagnation or decline in economic growth because there wouldn't be enough labor to use the capital stock efficiently. Fiscal balances could deteriorate, especially in light of the number of retirees compared to the active population, and the welfare of the elderly and actually household could be severely affected as their needs for services cannot be met. Now, if we have an acceleration of mobility, but not enough of a pool, of large enough pool of skills, then labor surplus regions are likely to suffer, and they could experience severe brain and or, let's call it, arm drains, because that means high skills and mid-level skills exodus and related labor shortages in their own labor markets. So the stakes are very high for both the sending and the receiving countries. Okay, now we could say, okay, but Europe, for example, could do number of things to address this situation. So here we looked at a number of labor market policies scenario, and domestic labor market policies to offset the decline include the increase in overall participation rates for all European countries to bring it to the level of the US or the UK, which are higher than the rest. There could be an increase in female participation rates to the male level, or an increase in retirement age or increase in retirement age to the age of 74. So I'm not going to go through the graphs illustrate the different scenarios. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through them, but basically what we can say at the end is that from the statu quo means a decline of 66 million people in the labor force in Europe. Putting all these policies together would mean an increase of about 15 million people, but even if these policies could reduce the labor deficit compared to today, they will fail to solve the issue of age structure, which would be dominated by the older age group, the 40 to 74. and some of them may be very unpopular and politically difficult to implement. I mean, increasing the retirement age to age 74 is not easy to do, and all the labor force, with people starting to have more of health problems, and et cetera, requires really very different way of organizing the workplace. Okay, now we want to know also what would be the future skill needs in Europe. And we know already that the overall decline in the labor force is estimated to reach 66 million people in Europe and by 2050, and more than half of these people are people with secondary education. So we can say that notwithstanding the continued worldwide competition to attract the talented and gifted, the bulk of future demand for labor may be in the middle skills. We didn't do any work ourselves, but we looked at a number of studies that were made on the European labor markets and its future needs, and they all concord on increasing qualification requirement. I will not go through the graph in detail, but what I want to pinpoint is that we see for all level of occupation, from the lowest skills to the highest skills, within those categories, the lowest level of qualification decline, and the requirements for the higher level increase for all of them. Now, if we look at the MENA and the EU, we can ask, can MENA offer the skills that the EU needs? Can the EU offer the jobs that MENA needs? So for that, we are going to quickly at MENA demographics, labor force dynamics, and education and skills. So I'll go very quickly on this one. This is the population and labor force dynamics in MENA, and what we can see is that for the region as a whole, the young group is going to increase basically all along the period, but we see a declining trend as MENA enters also its demographic transition. And then we can also see on the second graph, upper level on the right-hand side, is that the situation varies a lot from between countries. And in percentage of the labor force, because by 2050, some countries are going to start to see some decline in the youngest age groups. The lower graphs show the population of the MENA immigration countries who are going to compete with the rest of the world for labor, because they are importing labor and they will continue to. MENA skill supply. Despite progress for the last few years, MENA is still lagging in education attainment. Illiteracy rates are still high. The education systems are biased towards humanity and social sciences at the expense of technical and scientific orientations, and female participation rates are low. At current participation rates and education levels, MENA country would offer a large number of essentially unskilled workers. Over the next 40 years plus, if there is no change, the 15 to 39 labor force will expand by 41 million people, mainly among those with primary education or less. Now, we looked at some scenarios, and we looked at what would happen if both labor force participation rates and education attainments approach the level of Euromed peers, that is Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and France, an average of those. If that happens, the labor force would increase by 57 million and would be much more tuned with labor market demands, as a large majority of the labor force would have secondary and post-secondary education. Again, for those interested, I mean, we can look at the graphs, but for the sake of time, I'll move to the next one, but you have the details in the graphs. Now, this is a very interesting illustration of what I just said. The left graph tells us what would happen if there is a statu quo, both in terms of education attainment and labor force participation rates. So what we see is that this is the EU net decline in the labor force, and the purple shows us what would be the increase in labor force age 15 to 39 in MENA that have completed secondary education. So really, it's not at all in line with the needs, the potential needs of Europe. Now, if, as I mentioned earlier, both labor force participation and education attainment change, what we see is an almost perfect match. So there are some complementarities, and EU and MENA can complement each other. If EU adapts its policies on labor mobility, MENA invests in skills development, and both, and we'll come back to this later, implement policies to facilitate mobility, that is social protection, financial innovation, education, social adaptation, social and cultural adaptation, education and training, etc. So from there, from this situation, we try to derive a framework that would be useful for policymakers for both sending and receiving countries. And the key question for policymaker is positioning of laissez-faire, where laissez-faire, given the consequences of not doing anything, can really not be the consequence of a well-informed analysis of the situation, but rather a negligent laissez-faire approach. And positioning entails a series of steps to be taken and strategic options explored to smooth the adaptation to the global conditions. And the first step for each country is really to look at the demographic and labor force path, because what we have seen in the graphs that we have in the previous graphs is that we looked at a snapshot of how the world would look in 2050. That does not mean at all that this is a gradual phenomena. Depending on the age structure and the history of each country, this could happen gradually, or this could happen suddenly, and sometimes sooner rather than later. So it's very important for countries to do this analysis and see where they stand. Now, let's look with a little bit more detail at the labor sending strategic options. And this is for the MENA countries, immigration. And here I would like to make a comment very quickly, is that we use the words of sending and receiving countries for the sake of simplicity in the expose. But the situation is more complex than that, and many MENA countries are starting to become both sending and receiving, so they really should be working on both sides on the matrix, on the policy front. But for the time being, let's keep things relatively simple. So MENA countries face three main strategic questions. Do they want to target labor mobility, that is migration, job mobility, that is, let's call it insourcing, attracting jobs in the service sector, or both? And many of them are already doing both. What type and level of education should they target? Labor sending jobs in sourcing countries may choose to concentrate their efforts on enhancing the quality of their tertiary education and its relevance to the need of the global labor market to attract high-level jobs, like in computers and accounting, etc., etc. Alternatively, they may decide to target mid-level skills that are already in high demand in many countries, such as nurses, cooks, waiters, etc. Finally, they may opt for both types of skills level if both are amenable to mitigate the pressure on the domestic labor market. But in any case, education and training curriculum will have to complement their technical training with life skills content to promote openness, facilitate adaptation to foreign environments, and enhance the ability to recognize and seize opportunities and take initiatives, which many of the MENA countries' graduates from at all levels don't have yet, because these are skills that that are not in the current curriculum. Now, also a big question for the MENA countries is which population to target. While ongoing education reform focus on the existing student body, many countries count among their unemployed the majority of young graduates and from university and secondary schools dropouts. This is a legacy of the poor education policies of the past. These populations could benefit from the opening of education system to second chance education facilities, to equip them with the right technical and life skills for today's domestic and global labor markets. But addressing the skills upgrading of this population will require, in turn, rethinking education reforms and exploring solutions adapted to their specific needs. And various options could be considered, including improving the access to existing education facilities at all levels where the teaching methods and curriculum are adequate. I'm not aware of any country that has that yet, but the other options is to include in existing schools, colleges, and universities specific curricula responding to the pedagogic needs of the population concerned and to labor market demands. And finally, the establishment of public or private schools targeting this population and other potential lifelong learning interests, which doesn't, the lifelong learning education facilities and options do not exist in most MENA countries. But what is clear is that from the labor-sending perspectives, well-managed immigration and the clear policy for insourcing will require extensive education, training, and retraining efforts. For the labor receiving, the strategic options are, again, labor, immigration, jobs, outsourcing, or both, although both are today extremely controversial. In the future, businesses and politicians alike, when they will face a much tighter labor market, much more needs for labor, they will be thinking, do we need to import people or can we export the jobs? And depending on a number of considerations, including fiscal considerations, values, societal values, etc., they may be, to have a mix of these two that differ from country to country. The other question that they will be facing is the labor migration regimes. Do they want to have demand-driven? Leave most of the possibility most of the latitude to recruit to the firms, to the business community, while overseeing what has to do, or do they want to be in charge through a point system, for example, like in the point system in Canada? The other option is the duration of stay. Do they want to have temporary workers mostly? Do they want to have circular migration, people who come and go depending on what's happening in the labor market? Do they want to have transitory migrants leading to permanent migration? And that is especially if they want to keep or the structure of the age structure of the population as it is today, or at least reduce the bias towards the older age groups. They may want to take very young people from at the end of high schools that do their studies here, that adopt, that do their studies in European countries, are young enough to adapt to the society, and by the time they are on the labor market, they don't face any adaptation problems. Okay, 5 minutes, oh my God. Oh, this is going to be tough. Okay, so here's the policy framework for labor and job mobility, and I'll go very quickly. On the supply side, we have ensuring quality, facilitating mobility, reaping the economic benefits from mobility, and nurturing national abroad. From the demand side, we have selection of migration programs, demand, supply, integration of migrants, language and cultural training, anti-discrimination legislation and its enforcement, enhancing acceptance of social, ethnic, and cultural diversity, which is the societal challenges that many European countries are going to face in the future, and facilitating mobility. But the most important one is the one in the middle, market supporting institutions. Market needs strong and well-designed institutions to function well. And in this case, this, you can see the details but I go quickly. The first set of institutions, the one will be in charge of monitoring global and local and domestic labor markets. They will be looking at the vacancy trends, the emerging area of labor shortages, information analysis and dissemination, etc., etc. Those that will be looking at, will be monitoring the global and domestic education and training, and working on testing and rating functions, accreditation of education institutions, and recognition of diploma, etc. And those that will be matching the demand and the supply, which is basically accreditation and monitoring of recruitment agencies so that they do a good job. Now, the actors for this framework are the usual suspects. We have the public sector, we have the private sector, the NGOs and the trade unions. We say it in the report here, we put NGOs and trade unions together, and the donors. And all of them are already working to some extent in some of these issues, and they will have, there is room for much, much more to do for all of them, and especially much more collaboration and coordination of their efforts. Now, we looked at MENA and the EU. So this is very important. How does this fit in the global story? The EU and MENA situation is not a special case. We saw at the beginning that the imbalances are going to be global. And we know that MENA needs for skill development is representative of other potential supply regions. Actually, MENA is doing better in many aspects than Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So what we said about MENA is really relevant for the other potential supply countries. The EU trend of higher qualification requirements at all levels of occupation is representative of other developed and even developing economies. And the demographics, we cannot, I mean, today's demographic is locked in, tomorrow's demographic is locked in today's demographic. So no matter, even the policy that we have looked at, they will be difficult to implement. And if they are implemented, they can deal with the size, but not the age structure of the population in European labor markets. But all the policy changes that we have discussed that will need to be done in terms of social protection, financial innovation, adaptations, etc., could take place as things happen, as labor markets tighten and the need for change is felt. There is only one area, and this is the most important thing that this report brings to the debate on this mobility issue. There is only one area where there cannot be an instant adjustment, and that's the skill supply. Why? The answer is very simple. It's obvious, but we don't think necessarily about it. It takes 15 to 20 or more years to educate a potentially skilled worker from childhood to adulthood. So, and that's the first point. And the second point, the potential supply regions do not necessarily have the resources and or the know-how to make this happen. And this we know because they have been struggling with these issues for the last 20 to 30 years. So they won't be able to do it on their own. So the quality of tomorrow's labor force will depend on today's action. And an insufficient global pool of skills means human resources drains for sending countries, we saw it, and competition for skills among receiving countries. So the point that we want to make is that global collaboration is the best way to ensure the adequate skills supply globally for tomorrow. If this does not happen, the whole world will be will face a very different, difficult situation in terms of availability of skills. Here you have collaboration, competition, the payoff matrix, and I'll tell you what the matrix does. We can look at it later because we don't have that much time. But basically what it does, it looks at if there is collaboration, what would happen in terms of education. If there is competition, what would happen in terms of competition, of education, and what would be the consequences. And the same for integration, social protection, and financial services. The conclusions, what we should take out of this work is, first, it is very likely that there will be a sharp acceleration of mobility globally. Second, the future skills supply could be a major bottleneck in these pictures. So the conclusion is that we need to work on skills development across the world now to ensure an adequate pool of skills for the future. Why across the world? Let's assume that MENA and EU work together to ensure that the EU could have the skills that it needs in the future, and MENA is not drained from the skills that it needs. Now, if China, Japan, North America, and Canada, the US and Canada, and the high-income countries of East Asia do not find those skills that they need also in Africa or South Asia, which are the two other potential regions, where are they going to get them? Wherever they can find them. So MENA and EU may be subsidizing the rest of the world if there isn't a global effort and face the same problems no matter what investment they put in. So the point is that this will require resources and or know-how for the potential supply regions, and it won't be possible to work only unilaterally or bilaterally. Only a global approach would do the job for the whole world. And basically, collaboration is a win-win, and competition is going to be a loss-loss.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to hurry you, but...